The bodyweight squat is one of the fundamental human movement patterns. In this video I will show the different factors that can affect squat depth, as well as some mobility exercise to improve the squatting form. The squat mechanics is influenced by unchangeable factors such as bone length and body proportion, and the geometry of the hip articulation, and the changeable factors such as soft tissues flexibility and muscular strength. Regarding body proportion, people with relatively longer femur with respect to the trunk or shorter tibia with respect to the femur and the trunk may have a problem to squat low without leaning forward, even if with the same movement ability of a person with standard proportion. To maintain balance during the movement, the projection of the body's center of mass needs to remain inside the base of support created by the feet. So, for these people, may be useful to adopt a wider stance and abduct the hips in order to keep the body center of mass above the support of the feet while limiting the amount of forward lean. Another option in the case of a weighted squat variation is to place the weight in front of the body, such as in the front squat or goblet squat, shifting the total center of mass more forward. However, a forward lean during the squat is not wrong by definition, if the rest of the technique is on point, meaning having an almost neutral spine position throughout the whole movement. The second unchangeable factor that can influence the ability to squat is the hip joint anatomy. The hip joint is a ball and socket joint. The basic composition of the joint is the same for all humans, but the geometry of the single parts can vary between individuals. There are variations in femoral neck inclination in both the sagittal plane and in the horizontal plane. There are variations also for the depth of the hip socket and the length of the femoral neck. And finally, there are variations also for the orientation of the hip socket, with side-oriented hip socket and more front-oriented hip socket. Imagine now all the possible combination of all these factors, and you can understand that the ideal squat stance cannot be a one-size-fits-all. The good news is that there are factors that influence the squat mechanics that we can control. These factors are the range of motion of active dorsiflexion of the ankle joints and the range of motion of active hip flexion with neutral pelvis. To improve the range of motion of ankle dorsiflexion, we have to enhance the mobility of the antagonist muscles, the ankle plantar flexors. Since the first is a biarticular muscle, it cannot be a cause of limited ankle dorsiflexions during the squat, because the knee flexed position ensures that the muscle is not stretched during the movement. On the other hand, the lengthening of the soleus is governed only by the ankle motion. Therefore, a stiff soleus may restrict active ankle dorsiflexion. In the graphic, I've reported a combination of foam rolling, stretching and strengthening exercise to improve the ankle mobility for the squat. For the self-myofascial release part, there can be three different options. A static release technique, which consists in finding the most tender spot in the muscle and to keep the pressure for around 1 minute. An active release technique, similar to the first, but this time performing the active movement of ankle plantar flexion and dorsiflexion while maintaining the pressure on the spot. And a final alternative method called cross-fiber massage. Here you maintain the pressure on the same position and you rotate the entire leg side to side. For the first option of the stretching part, lean toward the wall using your hand for support and extend back the target leg for the stretch. To hit more the soleus muscle, flex slightly the knee and try to move it toward the wall. For the second technique, place the target leg over a support. Lean forward until you touch the thigh with your chest. Grab the edges of the chair and gently pull the chest more forward, increasing the stretch on the soleus and the Achilles tendon. For both the stretching methods, you can also use an elastic band to help for proper ankle joint movement, especially if you have suffered of ankle sprains in the past. The soleus muscle should be trained in the range of motion it experiences during the squat, therefore in the maximum lengthened position. A first option may be the classic calves raise exercise on a step. The step allows the heels to travel a larger distance and to work the calf muscle in a greater range of motion. Again, to target more specifically the soleus muscle, you can slightly flex the knee during the exercise. An alternative may be the seated calf raises on a step. However, in this case, you may have to load the movement with additional weight, since your body weight is mostly supported by the chair. The antagonist muscles of the soleus, mainly the tibialis anterior, should be trained in the maximum shortened position. The simplest option is the seated toe raises exercise. Try to hit the hand range of motion of ankle dorsiflexion during each rep, with a full contraction of the shin muscle. An alternative, with the potential of progressive overload of the exercise, can be the resisted ankle dorsiflexion with an elastic band. The second joint we have to look at to improve the mobility for the squat is the hip joint. The correct execution of a deep squat requires a large amount of hip flexion without losing the natural curve in the lumbar spine. However, it may happen to flex the lumbar spine on the bottom of a deep squat, and this rounding of the spine is called buttwing. Excluding structural factors, buttwing can be caused by a posterior pelvic tilt action of tight extensor muscles of the hip. The hamstrings have been blamed to be the cause of buttwing, since they can posteriorly tilt the pelvis and are often tight in most people. However, this cannot be possible during a squat. The knee flexion action of the squat ensures a slack in the muscular tissue, and therefore the hamstrings see only a slight, if any, change in length during the squat. There are two other muscles whose primary action is not hip extension, but because of their attachment in the posterior side of the hip, these muscles have the potential of tilting the pelvis backwards. These muscles are the adductor magnus and the piriformis. Both are monoarticular muscles, and therefore, if they are not flexible enough, they can drag the pelvis in a posterior tilt for extreme range of motion of hip flexion. As done for the ankle, I propose here a short mobility routine for the hips consisting in a combination of foam rolling, stretching and strengthening exercise. To release a tight piriformis, sit on the foam roller, cross the leg on top of the other, and lean toward the hip of the crossed leg. Search for tender spots, and when you find them, hold the pressure for almost 1 minute with controlled breathing. If you feel tingling or numbness, adjust the position until you don't feel it anymore. For the adductor magnus, the standard foam rolling technique consists in lying on the floor with the roller on the side, placing the leg on top by flexing and abducting the hip. As an alternative method, you can place the foam roller over the corner of a table and then, from a standing position, search for trigger points in the muscle near the attachment to the pelvis. To stretch the piriformis, place the leg externally rotated on a table, at almost hip height. Then, lean forward by flexing at the hip, maintaining the neutral curve of the spine. To stretch the adductor magnus, start in a quadruped position and abduct one straight leg to the side. Move with the hands and the torso almost in the middle of the angle formed by the legs. Now, start moving backwards with the hips, maintaining a neutral spine position, until you feel the stretch in the lower inside part of the thigh. This can be performed both as a dynamic and a static stretching technique. The piriformis and adductor magnus muscle should then be strengthened in the maximum elongated position. For the piriformis, start in a so-called 4 position, with the front leg externally rotated and the back leg internally rotated. Lift from the ground and return down with a hinging motion at the hips, maintaining a neutral spine throughout the movement. To regress the exercise, sit onto an object to reduce the range of motion. A progression could be the addition of weight, such as a light kettlebell. For the adductor magnus, start in a wide stance, feeling only a light stretch on the adductors. Then hinge at the hips and move forward with the trunk. Again, the spine must be kept neutral during the movement. You can slightly flex the knee if the flexibility of the hamstrings is limiting your maximum range of motion. To make the exercise more challenging, you can add weight such as a light kettlebell or a dumbbell. The main antagonist muscle that counteracts the posterior pelvic tilt action of batwing is the psoas. These should be strengthened in the maximum shortened position. For the simplest option, flex the hip from the standing position to the maximum height you are able to. The resistance can then be increased by pushing with both hands and performing sets of isometric contraction. Another option may be the use of a small weight placed on top of the knee or anchored at the ankle. A second alternative may be the supine hip flexor march with an elastic band. You can either use a band fixed to a support or a mini band fixed on the opposite foot. So that is the end for today's video. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.